This is Women with Books, a collection of conversations about your favorite books, media, and all of the fabulous things in life. Curated by me, author Lindsay Emery. I'm so glad you're a part of today's chat. Welcome to day 10,000 of the 2020 COVID-19 quarantine. How are y'all doing? Once again, my family and me, we're doing okay. We're just putting a step in front of the other, one meal, one school assignment, one walk around the neighborhood at a time. One big thing that happened at our house, it's fairly newsworthy. I know you want to hear it. We gave our dog a haircut for the first time ever. We used to, my husband and I were reminiscing, we used to give our first dog a haircut back when we were very newlywed and very poor, and we couldn't afford a groomer. But, you know, we started making a little bit more money. We decided to outsource that, but unfortunately I could not get a grooming appointment in Texas while they were still open. So our poor dog was just getting hairier and hairier. He's a giant schnauzer. He has a really thick black coat. So yeah, that was fun. He's a big black dog, so he was happier. He is happier now that he's cooler. So we're not really beating ourselves up over the fact that he's a little lopsided. He doesn't care. Our neighbors don't care. They're the only ones that see him. So we're all good. Anyway. This is what qualifies as news these days, right? We officially this week had our trips canceled for this summer. And yeah, that really made me sad. I don't know what to do with myself. I talk about it a lot that I'm a planner. I love planning ahead. I love planning trips. And that's one thing the virus has stolen from me. And it sounds lame, but you know, I think a lot of us are dealing with it. We grieve the little things that we're losing here and there, and I've allowed myself to just mope and feel sorry for myself, knowing that one day, not that we'll get back to normal, but there will be other opportunities and other new horizons to look forward to. But that actually brings me to what we're talking about today on this podcast. It's more of a reason to get lost in a book. And like the book that I talk about extensively in this interview with Amy Harmon, bless her heart, I think she was like, could we stop talking about this book? No, I emailed you, Amy, for a reason. I wanted to talk about this book, Where the Lost Wander. And as a note, we recorded our conversation in two parts. The first time we talked, we had some pretty bad internet connectivity issues, probably due to the earthquake in Utah that had just happened. So a lot of times when I can't record a good interview, I just say, hey, let's time out. Let's put a kibosh on this for a while. We paused, we regrouped, we rescheduled. And thankfully, we didn't have much on our schedules these days. And then we came back for round 2 of the interview. And I decided to keep that in. You'll hear the break around 15 minutes. And I did that for a reason. I could have edited it to make it sound like it was all one conversation. But I was inspired. I wanted to keep this in to show our pioneer spirit, you know, to show future historians what it was like trying to do a podcast in the COVID-19 quarantine era, you know, the hardships we had to endure. Our internet went down because of earthquakes. I'm laughing because, God, if I'd listened to this 6 months ago, my 6-month past self would be thinking I was really losing it. Anyway, in this interview, you can see what's been on my mind a lot recently. There's been a new kind of survival. I've been thinking about homesteading. You know, do we have enough meat and eggs? And reading Amy's book during this time, which is about, the book is about a family on the wagon trail in the 1850s. The wagon trail, of course, for the non-American listeners, being like the way that pioneers settled our country, going from the East Coast to the West Coast. It was so impactful for me to read this book at this time. Not only is it a great, great book, I could not put it down, but it was a great book for me at the right time, which is a gift that we don't get very often, right? Like, just something that just perfectly pegs into where we are in our lives and something we need to process and something we need to think about. But it was a gift for me, and I'm so glad I now get to share the book and this fascinating conversation with a thoughtful and talented author with you. Welcome to Women with Books. I'd love to welcome our esteemed guest today, Ms. Amy Harmon. How are you doing today, Amy?
I am so good. It's so nice to be here and just talk books.
I'll be releasing this episode when your book comes out, which is April 28th. Is that right?
Yes.
But we're recording this in the midst of the early days of the COVID-19 self-isolation drama. So Amy and I might be touching a little bit
Sure.
about what's going on in our lives, because it's kind of infiltrating everything. But you were talking about how nice it is to be talking about books, and I have noticed on social media, like, so many people saying, oh, what's good to read? What are you reading? Let me have recommendations for you. So I think this is the perfect time for us to be talking about it. Right.
And throughout history, when things get bad, you can always rely on books. You can always rely on that escape and the perspective that comes when you read, because you realize that, things have been bad before and things will be bad again, and that we can learn a lot through these experiences. And it's great fodder to write with. So we have to look at it that way. These are all experiences and that we can use in our writing.
I love that. Well, the first time you were brought to my attention as an author was the very first season of this show. I had someone by the name of Penny Reed on the podcast, and she recommended like all of your books. Like, seriously, I went back and looked at the thing, and I was like, what books do you love? And she started listing off, like, I think she listed off 4 or 5 Amy Harmon books, and she's like, you know what? Just all the Amy Harmon books. All the Amy Harmon books.
Yes,
so I actually
Penny
put that in. You guys are friends?
We are. We met at an event when she was promoting her very first Neanderthal Seeks Human, and she had already read several of mine, and we were in an elevator together, and she fangirled, and it was the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to me, because it just doesn't happen, that somebody is really excited to meet you. And then I found out she was an author as well, and I read her books after that. But yes, so ever since then, and her star has risen rapidly. She's delightful and such a great, smart writer. But we're friends now, so that's a fun thing that we not only appreciate each other as humans, but as writers.
I love that, because I think just as barely getting to know Penny as I have, and just talking with you and knowing your books, I can kind of see where some of the interests overlie and overlap. Mm-hmm. And you have 15 books, I counted up. Is that correct?
Yes, 15. I just finished with this, the one that's releasing. I actually just finished. I had just got through a deadline a week and a half ago of a book that's not going to be out until March of next year. So I've written 16, but one's a ways off.
And I'm going to get into a lot of the books, but I don't think I can stop myself anymore. Sure. I want to talk about your April 2020 release, Where the Lost Wander. And I've already gotten to read a copy, thanks to your publisher on NetGalley. And I I loved it so much, Amy. It was...
Oh, I'm so glad.
It completely sucked me in. I am a sucker for American history. It's not really necessarily the most popular time to write about right now, which I can't believe because I'm also, and I don't know about you, but I am also a part of what they call the Oregon Trail generation.
Oh yes, the game.
The game.
Yes, that's all how we all relate to the Oregon Trail is through the game that we once played as kids. Yes, I'm part of the Oregon Trail.
Yes, and it's like you took that game and you made it like 4D, and you made me cry, and you elaborated and made this beautiful, even though they're not officially on the Oregon Trail, but we'll get into that. And you made me cry, and I was just completely wrapped up in the story, and I've been haunted by it, and not haunted in a bad way, but haunted, like I just keep thinking of this stuff, because what's funny is that all these, I have 2 kids, and a lot of times, like when they complain or whine about something, I also go back to Little House on the Prairie a lot. That was formative in my youth. And I'll be like, you know what? Kids on the prairie used to have to do blah, blah, blah. And you're complaining about taking the trash out. So now I have something else to like throw in their face. So can you tell us about it? Yeah.
Yes. Well, my publisher, when I presented the idea to her, my editor at my publisher, she was like, I love it. It's not as commercial as my last,
yes, The Time Slip. Yeah.
What the Wind Knows, which is Irish, right. So she says, I don't know if the time period is as commercial, because again, American history, and especially pioneers, 1850s, it isn't as, glam, or I don't know. It's not a war book. I don't know what it is about certain periods, but they definitely are more draw, and you don't see a lot of books that are written in this time period. But I have some family history. John Lowry is actually the name of my husband's 5 times great grandfather, and he was half Pawnee Indian. For those that are listening, it's Pawnee, and his story was very interesting to me. And when my husband started learning more about his family history, that's actually when I thought, this character is growing in me, even though I had to fictionalize so much, because we only know so much about our ancestors. But he that was the spark that really lit my fire with this book. And I thought, there is a wonderful story here. And if I can just kind of overcome my own fear of the time period and of the book failing, you can't ever go into a book with the idea that, what do my readers want? I try to shy away from that, because I think that's a recipe for disaster. I think you always have to do what calls to you as a writer, because that's if you fall in love with it, your readers will fall in love with it. So I went forward, and what a journey it was. I mean, journey that they were on, but a journey that I went on with them. It was just the most emotional book that I've ever written. And it was surprising, because I've written about some really heavy topics, but for some reason, just the elements and the elemental nature of the struggle, the very simple day-to-day struggle of the people in my story, of John and Naomi and her family, and also just the Native American story, and the story of the settlement and going west, and all of it. The mixture is tragic and yet triumphant, and all of those things mixed together, and it just ended up being really an emotional tell for me. Cried throughout the last several chapters, where I just thought, get a hold of yourself, but it was very emotional, and I think it will be for my reader, and I think it will surprise people how gripping the story is, really, from the beginning. It's not a sleepy pioneer story.
Well, the book kind of opens up with a very exciting scene, and then it takes you back to explain like kind of where they got there, and so you are kind of, at least for me as a reader, I was going as fast as I could. And it really led to this feeling of like, oh my gosh, disaster is going to strike at any minute. Is she going to do it here? Is she going to do it here?
Yes.
Is she going to do it here?
Yes.
Which kind of remind me of your, the last book, What the Wind Knows?
Yes.
Is that the one? Because that one was a time slip book. And so you knew someone had gone back to time, but you didn't know how they were going to get back or when they were going to get back. So it kind of had that same very, very quiet, very subtle engine that just kept me flipping the pages. So, so for those of you that are like, oh, I don't want to read a story that's like 18 months on the trail. No, it's this book doesn't just like go, and then on day 120 we did this. I mean, it's constantly moving. And like you said, it's heavy, but I also felt like, and when you said that, I was like, you know what, you're right. But I think because your protagonists are such, I don't know, would you call them optimists or just, they're such optimistic people.
They have a very can-do attitude. And I do think when I read Pioneer Journals, which I read a lot of, I actually have family that had left Pioneer Journals, which was great because I was able to follow day to day what it was like. And of course, they never include as much as you want. But I think that was an attitude of many of the people that went west. I imagine, if it was like it is today and we had all the information that we could all spread around about how bad things were on the trail, nobody would have ever gone west because they would have been so scared of the whole face. Everybody would have been like, oh, well, I've heard this, you better not do this. And everybody would have just hunkered down in their homes, and they would have been, cholera was a pretty ugly disease. It killed lots of people. Every family was affected by that. And I'm not making light of what's happening now, but just the idea that kind of can do, I'm going to do this. Maybe it's ignorance. A lot of it was probably ignorance, but boy, are we glad that people were,
right.
had the faith and the fortitude to just set out and say, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Because, today I worry that we scare ourselves and each other so much that it makes it really hard to move forward in life.
Just a few days ago, they were posting pictures online of, the crowds at O'Hare and Dallas Fort Worth and just trying to get back in the country, and they couldn't because of, and like I saw one of those pictures and I felt panicked. I really don't like crowds very much. And the thought of crowds at the end of a transatlantic flight and not knowing when, trying to get back to your family and like feeling like everyone has a virus. I had to shut down all those pictures because I'm like, no way, I'm not going anywhere. And you're exactly right. If there had been selfies next to scalps and cholera, Oregon would still be very uninhabited.
Yes, it would. We would all be too afraid to go forth. And it's a really different world now, and our challenges will be different. But boy, I'm glad that didn't exist for them because they never would have went west.
I want to talk about some of the lessons from the pioneers that you've learned and stuff. So whatever comes up.
Okay.
So to the audience, I'm going to explain this in the intro, Amy.
Okay.
That we've been disconnected and reconnected, and that, again, this brings me back to your book, Where the Lost Wander, because the hardships we're facing in March 2020 were nothing compared to what people on the wagon trails had to face.
Right. Nothing.
And so before I hit record, you and I were talking about, grocery shopping and getting supplies and stuff. And I don't know, do you think that, and I said something kind of flippant, but I do think it's true. I said the pioneer woman in me wants to stock my pantry and wants to get all the necessities. I even did a sourdough starter.
Yeah.
Do you think that's like in our cultural DNA, in the United States, or do you think that's like a universal thing?
I think it's in our
by our DNA, period. I think there's something very biological that's imprinted over, how many millennia or whatever that we've been on the planet, that the need to prepare and to nest and all of those things, it's a survival thing. So I do think it is part of who we are, and that is good in many ways and ugly. We've seen the good and the ugly in that need to to survive and to provide that people buy more than they could possibly need, and so it goes both ways.
Yeah, I've actually shared some sourdough starter with my neighbor, because again, this is a very me thing to do. I'm like, I made this and now I'm going to share it with you. Yes. But my neighbor has chickens, so this is very we are homesteading. Yes. She shares eggs with me. I'm sharing sourdough starter with her. And actually, it was her son that came over, and he's like, now what do I do with this? What do I do? How do I do it? And I'm like, well, And so I'm giving him instructions, and he's feeling very nervous. And I said, look, people carried this across continents. You can't kill it. You'll be fine.
What great lessons, things that we didn't even think about talking to our kids about, or ways that we can, we can include history into the discussion. It's really kind of fascinating right now. And we've had I have 4 kids, lots of interesting discussions in this last few weeks, that things that just didn't come up before, and so I think that they're getting an education in ways that we couldn't possibly drill things home the way that we're able to do that now, and really make history come alive the way we're able to do that now.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been until now a homeschooler. Yeah. But, I'm teaching, we did the sourdough starter together. I taught my daughter how to make biscuits with it. They're because they're bored, so they're coming in the kitchen. Sure. I'm like, hey, we're cooking stuff from scratch. So, here you go. And, I feel a real connection to our ancestors that way. It's very interesting. Yeah. So when I first started reading the book, it's in first person present, right? Yes. So I immediately felt connected to the characters, but I also was immediately reminded of the pioneer art of journaling and keeping journals and diaries and things. And I think you referenced that before in our last conversation about how you referenced those when you were preparing for this book. Were there any in particular that you read, or any from your family that you particularly relied upon? Yes,
my husband's 5 times great-grandfather, his name was Appleton Milo, quite the name, Appleton Milo Harmon. Oh, great name. Yes, and he crossed, I think, 5 times back and forth. As he was a young man, newly married the first time he crossed, and then he went back to help others cross. He was a good journaler, and several generations ago, a family member compiled everything and had it bound. And so now, so many of us that are in that lineage, or in that family group, which is now enormous, as you look back 5 generations, sure. it has really grown, the Harmon line. But I had his journal and read it several times through it. And the funny thing is that, and women's compilations, there's lots of Oregon Trail compilations that people have put together that are many families or many journals. And so that's always interesting, because everybody's take is just a tiny bit different. There are definitely common threads, but even our memories are faulty too, where they're at. And I was amazed a lot of times with how well they remembered, and how well they were able to describe, and how, what a good idea they really did have of where they were at. I would be lost. That would not be my job, to keep track of everybody, and we would be wandering up into Canada if I would have been the one in charge. We wouldn't have gotten there. I'm not great with directions, but it was really interesting reading the family account, and of course the account from a man's point of view. The things he worried about were different, which was kind of what we talked about earlier. And then, the women's point of view, and there were definitely people that were more positive and focused on the positive, and then others that were just, miserable from the get-go and really suffered.
Yeah. Well, speaking of directions, I'm generally a very good directions person, but your book made me very anxious
Yes.
for a lot of reasons in a lot of places. But there were parts where it was like, go past that tree and go past the rocks. And they were just telling their kids that. Their preteen sons or their teenage sons. And they're like, okay, we'll catch up with you in a few days if you follow these directions. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know about you, Amy, but my kids, if I had told them, go past a tree and then some rocks and find us, I mean...
No, it was, when you read stuff like that, and there's so many instances of that where the children really had to, or they all had to, but the children really had to grow up quickly because they just didn't have the luxury of coddling them at all. They just couldn't. It wasn't possible, and so often it was like that. And if you read the old immigrants' guides, they're really interesting. In fact, Appleton Milo Harmon, the ancestor, helped develop the wheel that actually helped measure how many wheel rotations, and they were able to figure out per wheel rotation how far things were. And so, yes, it was fascinating. And he talks about that in his journal, about they were able to, it was a gadget that they hooked onto the wheel, and it measured rotations.
I love that ingenuity,
Oh my gosh.
And I'm seeing that actually, and again, bringing it back to today, I've been so heartened by what I've been seeing. People are, we're using now our technology, but people are using 3D printers, distilleries are telling other distilleries how to make hand sanitizer. You're still kind of seeing that resourcefulness today, even without quite as much danger on the trail. Right.
Yeah, they definitely had different things to overcome that way. But yeah, that a whole idea of sending your children out and saying, turn this way or turn that. But the Immigrant's Guide is really interesting. I have the original, it's the original copy, put it that way, of the Immigrant's Guide. And it was interesting to read. It's about this far, and you'll see, and it was like that. The entire journey, the thousands of miles they went, it was in pieces like that. Well, you'll go about this far and you'll see a scrub, some scrub oak on your right, and then you'll go about this far and you'll see the lone tree. And the lone tree didn't last very long, obviously.
Right. What if someone cuts down the tree?
I know. And they had the lone tree had little sections of the takeoff, so it was eventually like a lone stump. But it was like that through the entire journey that they had their little landmarks. And of course there were big landmarks like Chimney Rock and things like that, where they were unmistakable and those things really encouraged the travelers, because they were unmistakable. We've made it this far. But really, we think we've got it tough now. We can plug in an address on our phones and it'll take us there. They really had to set out and hope for the best. And most of them made it. The majority of them made it, which is crazy.
Yeah. You didn't have people just going around in circles for that long.
No.
Someone either found them or they perished. But anyway,
yes.
in the book, John Lowry, your mailman character, he referenced a book. Was that kind of the same thing that your ancestor wrote?
Yeah.
Okay.
My ancestor
he mentioned a guide or something, right?
Well, they had guides. Yeah, they had
whatever they're called.
Yeah, they were sold, just like it says in the book. They were sold for 50 cents. It was called The Immigrant's Guide West, and there were different versions, updated versions throughout the years as people continued to go and improve upon the instructions. But they would buy these little guides and rely on them and like I said, you can still get those today, what they actually looked like, and read through, and that's what I did. I used that, and then I used the different Pioneer records, lots of those, and of course my ancestors' record as well. And so it was actually, as far as the historical books I've written, there was something really simplistic about this one, because it was the day-to-day, day-by-day incidents. It wasn't World War II where you had all of these, there was so much going on. This was so simple in the fact that there was nothing but that day that they had to overcome, and I think that that's a lot like what we're even dealing with now too, the idea of one day at a time. Everything's been simplified to what's going on in this day and in this moment, and we just do the best we can right here. And that's another parallel that I found with the book. Yeah,
because it's so true. I mean, it's been an adjustment for a lot of us, and even more so who knows by the time this podcast comes out, by the time your book comes out, we might be all back to normal, or we might not. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
I don't know either.
But yeah, so we've just downshifted, and all of a sudden, I don't have soccer practices, I don't have tennis practices, I don't have all these things, and it's just, what are we eating today? Are we going outside today?
Yes.
Yeah. Am I getting any work done today?
Yes. Yeah, I know. I haven't written in 2 weeks, and I'm grateful that I've been in that space where I just finished the one novel, sent it off to my publisher, and it was like everything hit the wall right after that, hit the fan right after that, and now I haven't even begun to think about this next project I need to be doing, because I have to focus in on what has to be done right now, and that's my family right now. So,
do you know what you're going to write next?
I do.
We don't have to announce it, but I just was wondering.
I think people that are my readers will be interested to know. But the first girl child is a Viking medieval. It was that came out.
I love medieval. Oh my gosh, I love Vikings.
Well, the first girl child came out last August, and there's so much in this world that I created that I am doing a spin-off with another character that was in that book. So that is and it's tentatively called The Second Blind Son. So so the first girl child, second blind son. And if we continue like this, there will be the third this and the fourth that. So that's the series, the first girl child series. But that's going to be worked on next.
Okay, I want to definitely circle back to your other books, but before that, I still have more questions about Way the Lost Wonder. Because I'm telling myself that I'm like, don't get distracted, finish this. Okay, I have to know though, because Naomi, your female protagonist, she is an artist. So we were talking about all these people who are writing journals and stuff. She basically drew her way across the country, and unfortunately we can't see them. One day I think it'd be awesome. You can have a illustrated compendium of
that would be so great.
Naomi's stuff. I'm not volunteering to do it. I do not draw. But,
I can't do it either.
But I found that so interesting, and of course you worked it through the story beautifully. Did you, when you first made her an artist, did you know how that was going to impact the rest of the story, or how did you get that idea?
You know what? I don't even remember where the ideas all originate. It's always just a thin thread that becomes thicker, and you start to wind it into something else, and you weave your story. But I don't really know I can't remember where that first thought came from. But I always tend to have those artistic talents. Something similar to that, there's always something that they can do. In fact, somebody asked me, one of my readers asked me, don't you ever just want to, one of your characters to just sit and play video games? I mean, do they all have to be artists? And they're not all artists, but, definitely, sculpting or art or music, those things, or writing, those things just make their way into my stories. But I loved the idea of, and you caught it, the idea of her journaling through art because, it's something I couldn't do. I would have to use my words. But that idea was really fascinating to me. And I liked the idea also. My grandma used to have the illustrated journals of the journal of a Edwardian lady. I don't know if you've seen those where they're the set in the 1850s kind of thing, and they are the journals of different ladies, English ladies, but they are all illustrated by the women. She had several of them, and just beautiful works of art, but they were just their journals, their daily journal that they had drawn birds in the margins or trees or plants or so these beautiful little illustrated journals that they've now published. But that idea was really interesting to me of drawing, as she went along. And of course, her drawing John and being fascinated by the way he looked, that was all part of the idea of her being an artist and being really into the way that he looked, because he looked different than the men in her family, the men she was used to. So I liked that idea.
Well, and actually, it becomes a great skill that not many people have out there, and it actually saves her life, which you wouldn't expect at the very beginning. This girl is just drawing things, and it does come in. It saves many people several times. So So one of the things that I've always been fascinated with ever since I was a kid, and you talked about it too in your book, was that when people went across country, they would take things from their old lives, and then you would see piles of them discarded. And it must have been a huge thing, because it's always mentioned in these books. There would be piles, and at the very beginning of the trip in your book, they talk about, these people, they're not going to last. They're going to, throw things off. And as you leave, just like Naomi leaves pictures behind, other people leave little crumbs of themselves behind, because it got too heavy, because they said, why the heck did I think I needed grandma's dinette set? Yes. And so I've always thought about that, and probably because I'm also a planner. But did you think about what you would take with you on a trip like that? Like, what would be too valuable for you to leave behind?
I'm the most non-hoarder woman you'll ever meet. I have a really hard time. I am not sentimental about things at all. And so, in fact, my mom used to tease me when I was younger that I would clean out my closet and I would get rid of things that I wore, that I needed. She says, "Why did you get rid of that?" And it was because that cleaning out was very therapeutic to me. Not being attached to things was comforting to me. And so that's a hard one for me. Obviously, I would want things that we needed, but as far as having an attachment to things, I don't feel that kind of attachment, and I never have. I would probably journal.
So you're like Naomi.
I am. I mean, I think maybe that's why she is the way she is, because it's the way that I am. I just don't. I don't feel that kind of attachment.
That's so interesting, because I was very impressed with the fact that she was very adaptable, and she did not. I mean, she was attached to people, of course, and then maybe animals second. But other than that, she was like good to go. She didn't need a lot, and I was very impressed with that. And I have been that way. Yeah, because I would at least be like, I would like a warm blanket. I would like, I'm not sleeping on the ground. I mean, I would. Sure. But
I mean, exactly. I like my comforts, but I don't seem to be. I'm not a collector of anything. And I don't hold on to things, and I don't have a lot of attachment to things. Some people are really sentimental, and I don't tend to be, which is I've been teased about a few times.
So you write in several genres. So the ones you were just telling me about, Viking medieval, is that straight up historical, or is that like historical fantasy, or what is that?
It feels more like fantasy in a Viking, in a real world setting. I didn't create a moon world or anything like that, but I do have I do have a love for fairy tales and for fantasy. And so the first girl child has that kind of Norwegian, Viking, Norse mythology feel to it. And it's fantasy, but not high fantasy. It could almost be real. And then I do have a couple others that I wrote. The Bird and the Sword and The Queen and the Cure have that same medieval fantasy feel, but they are not connected to the first girl child. So I do love fantasy. I've written in 3 genres: historical, fantasy, and contemporary. So,
do you read in all those genres as well?
I have always read in everything. I've always read everything I can get my hands on. So I've never felt any kind of intimidation towards writing in other genres. It's never bothered me, and I know that makes me different than other authors, but I have always just written whatever, catches my fancy, and it's a nice palate cleanser too. When I've done a really tough historical and I've had to research every word, every item of clothing, every turn of the head, it really has been comforting to then say, okay, I'm going to write a fantasy now and make everything up, So
I love that.
Yeah, that's been kind of where it first started, was after my first historical, I think book number 9 or 10. I thought I really need a palate cleanser. I need to do something that's totally different, and that's where The Bird and the Sword came from. Was fantasy, a complete fairy tale, completely different than World War II. And I wrote it in a very short amount of time for me. And it was nominated for the Goodreads Book of the Year in fantasy. So it really was a kind of a knock out of the park type of thing. And I didn't have to do, it was definitely a palate cleanser. So I've enjoyed it.
Well, when you were a child or something, have you always written, or was there a book that you read that you're like, oh, I can do that?
I've always written. I haven't always written novels, but as far as writing being my thing, I think I started out. I mean, I was writing. That was just always the way I expressed myself. Poetry, song lyrics, essays, short stories. That was always my thing. And I had a feeling I could do it, but I didn't actually write my first novel until I was in my 30s. My first full-length novel. Mm-hmm.
So was there a book that kind of was formative in your youth, or that changed your life, or anything like that comes to mind?
The one that comes to mind, and I don't know if it changed my life or just that I loved it so much and that I believed in the character so much and I identified with her, but I'm definitely a huge Anne of Green Gables. Some people love it, some people don't, but I've read that book so many times. It was formative for me. And the writer, Ella Montgomery, was formative for me because I lost myself in that book, and I lost myself over and over again in that book. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was really formative. Anne of Green Gables.
Yes, I agree. I can't even tell you how many times I read at least the first 4 books of the series.
Right.
I'm not even sure I had access. I don't think I knew that there was more than 4. Because back in the day, when some of us grew up, there was not internet. I remember being, as a kid, like so frustrated that I couldn't look up all the series.
Like
if I saw a book and it had, in the back, it would be like, sometimes the publishers would put all the books in the back, but I didn't know where to find them.
Right.
We shopped at used bookstores. So, it was very much like I would read things out of order. Mm-hmm. Life is very different these days.
It is.
Sounds like the pioneer days, childhood.
My childhood was really primitive compared to my own children. We had a bookmobile that would come to our little tiny town. There were shelves in the back. And every 2 weeks it would stop at the church, which was really there weren't any even businesses in this place where I grew up. It was just some homes and a church, and the bookmobile would stop at the church, and we knew when it was going to be there, and we would come and exchange, and they would only let you take so many, and I would read through them way before the bookmobile came back.
Oh,
so I was really limited.
painful.
Yeah, I was really limited to what, whatever he had on the shelves. And my mom and dad actually let me read anything. They didn't censor. I mean, I probably read things I shouldn't, but they just weren't concerned with that. I read everything, and my mom and I shared books I read Jane Eyre when I was 12. I mean, that's pretty young for a 12. Not to say there wasn't anything in there that you shouldn't read, but it was heavy for a 12-year-old. But it's one of my favorite books.
Basically, if anything had history in it, they let me read it because they thought it was educational.
Yes.
But that meant that included historical romance.
Exactly. Barbara Cartland.
MMK, Agatha Christie. I got a good dose of Agatha Christie. I'm trying to think. But Anne of Green Gables. Yeah, anything that, and I think that I love history, but I really love historical fiction. Like, I don't want to just read straight up history because
exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not, I can read a history book now and then if it's very well written, but, one that is also awesome. One of my favorite history books, and you've probably read it. I can't think of it right now. Okay, I'll edit the title. But yes, I lost the title. I can see the cover in my head. Oh, Undaunted Courage. Have you read that one?
I have not read that one.
Okay. That's one of my favorite books. It's about the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Oh, wow.
Just to show that I am legit loving cross-country pioneer stories for a very long time. When people ask you for recommendations, is there a book or an author that you always recommend?
I am a huge fan of Paulina Simon's The Bronze Horseman is one of my favorite books. She has there's 3 books in that series. The first one is my favorite, but I think it's just because it's where I fell in love. But I'm trying to think. I liked them all, but I love her, and I love the World War II from Leningrad. It's a totally different take on World War II that I had never known. I did not know about the Russian front at all. Yeah. And so that was really interesting to me. And now I know her, not well, but we've exchanged. She's read my books, I've read hers, and that blew my mind. When Paulina Simon, somebody that I had read and loved, read one of my historicals, that blew me away. It's a gift, a moment for me. Yeah. So I love her books. I like Susanna Kearsley. Wintersea was wonderful. And then I'm really old school. Also, the authors that I grew up reading, like Ellen Montgomery, and those are the people that have stayed with me. Even Beverly Cleary and Judy Blume, who are from my youth. Those are authors that I cherish. So, I'm old school.
Oh, I have such a big smile on my face right now. Just because I'm the same. All those ones. Well, what's something you've read recently or that you'd like to recommend?
Oh boy, I should have been ready for this question.
Oh, it's fine.
Have I read? I haven't read a whole lot recently.
You've been writing.
I've been writing. I don't let myself read actually when I'm writing because I worry about borrowing unintentionally. I think that's something every author worries about, that something will that will weave something into our story, and of course there's no original plot. But a phrase will stick with me, or I'll weave something in that doesn't belong to me, and that always makes me nervous. But I have not. I'm so sorry.
That's
I have not read anything beyond research. I have not read anything beyond research in probably a year.
Because I've talked about this so many times with other authors, with myself, and so my audience gets it. I mean, because I'm the same way. Like I kind of think of it as like when I'm fallow. I don't know if I'm using
I know
word
exactly what it means. Yes, a fallow field.
Yeah, a fallow field. I'm not working the field, but I that's the time when I read a ton, and I will read like 5, 6, 7, 8 books all at once. And then I can't read anymore, or I get like antsy and I'm like, I can't find anything I want to read. None of this makes sense. Like, I don't like this, I don't like that. And to me, that is I'm learning that is my clue that I have to start picking up a pen, because I'm not going to be satisfied by another person's book until I get something out of me.
That's really interesting.
That's been my discovery. That's very cool. I totally get it. So I like stock up books, like kind of mentally. I told someone the other day, I was like, I have to kind of like read a bunch and then it comes out in a different way. But because, I don't know, I've always been that way too, because just to keep my voice pure, I don't want to read someone else's voice, because then I start to sound like them, I think. Yes, I agree. Probably no one else can hear it, but I can. So yes, I'm the same way. But I used to read so much, and now I can't. I'm too much. The writer is the writer voice in my head, and the editor in my head is too strong, and I hate when I start reading. And I know so many authors that I hate when I start reading and I immediately think, I wouldn't have said it that way, or why are you using that word? I don't actually want to read my friends' books, my author friends, because I really don't want to think about their book. I want to just enjoy them as a person, and I don't want to have any kind of judgment on their work. And I will, because there's no way you can't turn it off when you start to read. So I've struggled with that a lot since I've really begun to write, full time. Yeah, I have a little bit of that as well, but that's when I know, when I can sink into it and I'm not editing it, like I did with Where the Lost Wander. Yes. When I can just sink into it, that's when I know I've got a keeper. And that's when I get really excited. And I send Amy Harmon an email and I say, I have to talk to you about this. Well, thank you so much, because that is exactly the truth. When you forget your reading, you've got a keeper. So. Yeah. Well, Ms. Harmon, are you ready for the lightning round of my Women? I hope I will be lightning. I'm feeling really not lightning today. I tried to prepare, but it's been a while since I prepared. So I hope I remember What's hilarious, and I know my listeners are laughing right now. I always say, this is the lightning round, and then I end up not going very fast. So. This is the mom version of the lightning round, where I'm like, oh, that reminds me, I want to talk to you about something. Exactly. Okay. All right, let's go. Dark or milk chocolate? Milk. Coffee or tea? Neither. Can't stand either of them. Well, fair. When your phone rings, do you answer it? No. How do you normally waste time on the internet? Instagram. That's Instagram and Twitter. I don't like Facebook. That's interesting. Okay. On your next vacation, will it be to the mountains or the beach whenever we have vacations again? We're my kids and I are praying we get to go to Edinburgh. We've been planning to go to Scotland, and we're praying that we get to go this summer. So, the Highlands. The Highlands. Oh, I love it. Do you call it soda or pop? In Utah, we call it pop. Okay. And on a romance hero, would you prefer abs, forearms, or a chiseled jaw? Chiseled jaw. Are you more likely to buy a book with a... Are you more likely to buy a book with a cover featuring abs or a beach scene? Beach scene. And very important and last question, Amy, and I'm really curious to know your answer to this one. What are your feelings about turning to the last page of a book first? Terrible. I have never done that. I think that is worth a beheading. No, definitely no. I know how much the authors do to get to that last page, so it's okay. Yeah, see, I was figuring that would be your answer, but because I could hear you're a true book lover, you've been a book lover your whole life. I thought that might be your answer, but you also seem like you have that practical streak. So I thought, well, maybe she's someone who's like, if I'm not going to like it, I'm not going to read it. So I wasn't quite sure, but
if I'm not going to like it, I'm not going to read it is the way I am. But I don't ever go to the last page to determine that. So I am definitely, I put things aside if it's not, if I don't like it. I don't have any qualms about that. Time is too precious, and there are too many good books to read. But.
Amy, thank you so much for coming on this podcast and being so determined and having the heart of a pioneer to keep striving, keep working so we could get this podcast together.
Thank you so much. It's been so fun. I've enjoyed it
so much. And I'm serious, everyone, especially, I just really think this book is gonna strike a chord, and a lot of people who, especially after the time we've gone through, a lot of authors are not writing things right now, and it's no fault of their own, because it's just, the struggles, and I think this book is coming out at a good time to really touch people. So thank you for talking to me about it.
Thank you so much, and I hope we can talk again.
I would love that. Thank you for joining me today. If you love this conversation, please leave a review or consider supporting the podcast at the link in the show notes. For a list of books discussed in this episode and other fabulous content, sign up for my newsletter at womenwithbooks.com. And remember, keep reading.